My name is Samantha Lee, and I'm 32 years old. Tonight, I'm walking into a place that once haunted me, the annual Quantum Innovations Gala, where my sister Rebecca always shines brightest. I'm not sure why I agreed to come, maybe curiosity, maybe because I've changed. But what I didn't expect was that within just a few hours, she would try to humiliate me in front of the entire industry. And I would be the one to shut her down in a way she'd never forget. This isn't just a story about a public comeback. It's about breaking free from a shadow that's followed me my whole life. Have you ever been compared, overlooked, or dismissed by your own family? Stay with me. This might be the story you've been waiting for. I stepped out of the car, heels clicking against the marble floor of the entrance hall. The venue was stunning. Towering glass walls, soft golden lights, elegant laughter echoing under chandeliers that probably cost more than my apartment. And yet, I felt like I didn't belong. My heart pounded so loudly, it drowned out the string quartet playing in the background. I rubbed my clammy palms against my dress, trying to breathe. I had changed. I kept telling myself that. I wasn't the girl they used to dismiss, not anymore. But the moment I walked into that room, saw the polished name boards, the polished people, and the polished smiles, the old weight settled right back onto my shoulders. And then I saw her, Rebecca, standing in the center of a small, admiring crowd, wine glass in hand, but tossing back her hair in that effortlessly confident way only she could manage. Her lips curled in a smile I knew too well, the one she reserved for public adoration and private contempt. She was glowing, as always. She looked exactly like the version of success our parents had always worshipped. Doctorate, partner at Pinnacle, invited speaker, favorite child. And there I was, hidden in the edge of the room, barely able to keep my feet steady. I turned away quickly, pretending to be interested in the hors d'oeuvres. But it was too late. That familiar feeling had already tightened around my throat. I hated that just one glance at her could make me feel 14 again. Awkward, invisible, trying so hard to be seen. The truth is, I'd been obsessing over this night for weeks, trying to prepare myself, playing out every possible version of our interaction in my head. Would she pretend not to see me? Would she throw one of her signature backhanded compliments? I wasn't sure what scared me more, her cruelty or my reaction to it. Because for years, just being in the same room with Rebecca meant I'd shrink. Not because she made me feel small, because everyone around us agreed she was the standard, and I simply wasn't enough. It wasn't always obvious. No shouting, no cruelty I could quote. Just silences, raised eyebrows, that subtle look of pity she gave me every time I mentioned a new job or side project. I took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. Not this time. This time, I wasn't here as the overlooked little sister. This time, I had something no one expected. I glanced at the stage in the distance, the one I'd soon walk onto as a guest of honor. A quiet fire lit up in my chest. Rebecca didn't know it yet, but tonight, her words wouldn't break me. Tonight, they'd break her illusion. I used to think favoritism was just something kids made up to feel better about themselves. A convenient excuse for not being as good, as fast, or as smart as their siblings. That's what I told myself anyway. Until it became impossible to ignore. When I was 7, Rebecca was already the golden child. She was reading middle school books while I was still sounding out picture books. At dinner, she'd spout facts about black holes and ancient civilizations, and my parents would beam like she'd just solved world hunger. Me? I once drew a fairly accurate dinosaur and got a distracted, "That's nice, honey," By the time I was 10, the difference in how we were treated wasn't subtle, it was systemic. Rebecca's piano recitals were grand affairs. New dresses, relatives invited, cameras flashing. When I had my first school play, my mom forgot to press record. When I asked afterward, she just laughed and said, "You'll have other ones." But she never missed a single one of Rebecca's. I started shrinking. Quietly, I stopped showing my drawings. I stopped mentioning my test scores. I stopped asking for attention because somewhere deep down, I knew the answer. I wasn't the one they bragged about. I was the one they tolerated. In school, things weren't much different. Teachers who had Rebecca before me would light up when they saw my last name, only to visibly deflate by mid-semester when they realized I wasn't her. I didn't win math competitions or debate tournaments. I wrote articles for the school paper. I liked helping other students with their projects. I was nice, but no one ever gave awards for nice. And at home, nice wasn't enough. Rebecca was ambition incarnate, captain of this, president of that. Every report card was a wall of A's, every standardized test another record broken. When I brought home a B+, my dad would sigh and say, "You know, your sister never got below an A in this class." It was always about her achievements, her potential, her future. I tried, God, I tried. I joined clubs I didn't care about, took honors classes that made me feel like I was drowning. I even tried to run for class secretary once, but lost badly. Rebecca, naturally, had been class president by then. I overheard one of her friends joke, "Guess it doesn't run in the family." The worst part? No one ever said I was a failure. They didn't have to. It was the absence of praise, the lack of interest, the way they only looked up when Rebecca entered the room. I learned how to disappear without making a sound. I learned to live in someone else's shadow. But I didn't hate her, not really. It's strange, isn't it? How you can feel completely crushed by someone and still crave their approval? I remember one afternoon, I must have been around 12, Rebecca found one of my stories tucked in a notebook on the kitchen table. She skimmed it and said, "This is cute," before tossing it back like it weighed nothing. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because she insulted it, she hadn't, but because I wanted more. I wanted her to look at me the way she looked at her trophies. I wanted someone, anyone, to think I was remarkable. Instead, I became the background character in my own home. The one no one noticed until something went wrong. I was too quiet, too sensitive, too average. There were no breakdowns, no rebellions. I did my homework. I helped with chores. I smiled at the right times. But inside, I was shrinking into myself. Sometimes I wonder what might have changed if just once, someone had looked at me with the same light in their eyes that they reserved for Rebecca. Even small wins felt like losses. I once made the honor roll and was so proud I taped the certificate to the fridge. The next day, Mom replaced it with Rebecca's college acceptance letter. Not out of malice, just because that was what mattered more. It always did. I think the real breaking point came in high school. I'd spent weeks working on a community service project, organizing a local book drive. We collected hundreds of books, created a mobile library cart, even got featured in the town newsletter. I was glowing when I brought the article home. Rebecca had gotten into Cornell that day. My mom read the headline of the article, smiled briefly, and said, "Sweetie, that's great. Did you see your sister's acceptance packet? They sent a whole folder." That night, I didn't cry. I just stared at the ceiling, realizing something no child should have to realize. My best would never be enough. Not because it wasn't good, but because it wasn't her. That realization didn't turn me bitter. It turned me invisible. I stopped expecting them to show up. I stopped telling them about my projects, my goals, my little wins. What was the point? Silence became easier than hope. But what they didn't know, what even I didn't realize back then, was that something else was growing inside me. A quiet resilience, the kind that doesn't scream or demand attention. The kind that waits, watches, learns. I learned that I couldn't force anyone to see me, but maybe, just maybe, one day I could build something they couldn't ignore. And no, it wouldn't be for them. It would be for me, because one day I'd stop chasing a seat at their table and start building my own. And when people tell me now how lucky I must be to have such a brilliant sister, I smile. Not out of agreement, but out of knowing they'll never understand what it's like to be constantly measured against someone who was never meant to be your yardstick. Rebecca wasn't the villain of my story. She was just the mirror everyone held up to remind me of who I wasn't. But now I'm done chasing reflections. I'm finally learning to see myself clearly, completely, and without apology. College was supposed to be my fresh start. A blank slate, no Rebecca, no constant comparisons. Just me, figuring out who I was without the shadow. But the shadow followed me anyway. I didn't get into a top-tier school. My grades were good, not great. I ended up at a state university, while Rebecca was off at Cornell. The family reaction was polite, but underwhelming. "It's a good place to find your path," my mom said. "Cornell is intense anyway," my dad added, trying to make me feel better. But I could hear it, the disappointment buried under forced optimism. I switched majors 3 times in the first 2 years. Computer science, psychology, then graphic design. I kept hoping I'd stumble into something that made me feel alive, or at least feel like I wasn't failing. Each switch felt like a confession. I still don't know what I'm good at. And each time I came home, I could see it on their faces. The polite smiles, the passive questions. "So what are you studying now?" followed by that quiet pause when I answered. Rebecca's updates, meanwhile, were newsletter-worthy. She had research grants, internships at Fortune 500 companies, glowing faculty recommendations. One Christmas, I overheard my uncle ask my dad, "So what's Samantha up to?" My dad chuckled and said, "She's still figuring it out." I laughed too, because what else was I supposed to do? Cry in front of the fireplace? The truth was, I was trying. I was juggling jobs, working late nights, filling in the financial gaps with freelance gigs. I graduated a semester late, 5.5 years instead of 4, but I did it. I sent out graduation announcements, proud in my own quiet way. Rebecca didn't come. She had a last-minute conference in Geneva. My parents did come, but I could feel they were distracted, like their minds were elsewhere. My mom asked me twice where the bathrooms were during the ceremony. My dad checked his watch more times than I could count. Still, I tried to stay hopeful. I told myself, it'll get better, they'll see the effort. But it didn't, not really. In the first few years out of college, I bounced from job to job, contract roles, part-time admin work, one miserable year at a tech support center, where I got yelled at daily by strangers for things I couldn't fix. Every family dinner turned into a minefield. Any career updates? Have you considered going back to school? You know, your sister has connections. Maybe she could help. But I didn't want her help, not because I was too proud, but because I knew what her help came with. Explanations, caveats, quiet judgment. I needed to prove to myself, if no one else, that I could do this on my own. At one birthday dinner, I showed up excited to share a new freelance contract I'd landed with a startup. I barely finished the sentence before Rebecca cut in to talk about her recent promotion and keynote speech in London. The table lit up. No one asked me another question for the rest of the night. That night, I went home and deleted the announcement draft I had planned to post. It felt pointless. I felt pointless. Eventually, I just stopped talking about work altogether. I became the quiet one, the private one, the one who was always fine. But I wasn't fine. I was exhausted, not just from life, but from carrying this constant weight of not being enough. And so I began to retreat, not out of spite, but out of survival. I declined more invitations, skipped more gatherings, let text threads go cold. I stopped looking for signs of approval and started focusing on what I needed to stay sane. I built routines, woke up early, took long walks with no destination, journaled, read books that made me feel seen, cried in the shower more than I'd admit to anyone. And slowly a new kind of silence grew, one that wasn't rooted in shame, but in space. Space to breathe, space to exist. I didn't hate my family, I just couldn't keep losing myself every time I stepped into their orbit. The more distance I created, the more clearly I saw the pattern. I had spent my whole life trying to be heard by people who never learned how to listen. So I stopped trying. And strangely, that's when I began to heal. Not because they changed, but because I stopped needing them to. And yet, even in the quiet, there was grief. Grief for the version of me that still wanted to make them proud. Grief for the conversations that never happened, though I see you or I'm proud of you that never came. I used to think if I worked hard enough, kept my head down, stayed respectable, they'd come around. But now I realized maybe they wouldn't, and maybe that had to be okay. What I was building, though messy and small, was mine. My peace, my solitude, my healing. I was learning to stop chasing applause and start trusting my own instincts. There were setbacks, of course. I still had nights where I'd spiral, where I'd question everything. But those nights were slowly becoming fewer. I started writing again, not for grades or praise, or to impress anyone, just for me. I wrote small stories, journal entries, half-finished thoughts. For the first time in a long time, I didn't need anyone to read them. I just needed to hear myself think. And in those moments, in that fragile, flickering light, I began to realize something no one had ever told me. You don't need to be someone else's success story to be your own. That truth, simple as it was, changed everything. It didn't fix the past. It didn't erase the scars. But it gave me the courage to stop hiding from myself. And that, quietly, stubbornly, was where everything began to shift. There's a particular kind of silence that comes with living alone. Not the peaceful, meditative kind, but the kind that settles in your bones. That was my life after I turned 26. No roommates, no partners, no random texts from family asking how I was doing. I had a small apartment in a rundown part of the city, the kind of place with leaky windows and pipes that groaned in protest every morning. My upstairs neighbor played guitar at 2 a.m., badly, but it was mine. Mine and the soft whir of the fridge and the hum of street lights that slipped through the blinds. I worked as a junior technician at a third-party IT firm. Mostly password resets, printer errors, and irate clients who thought yelling louder would make their files come back. It paid the bills, barely. I supplemented with small freelance gigs, designing simple websites, writing copy, testing beta apps for a few bucks. Most nights I came home, microwaved dinner, scrolled through job boards, then stayed up late watching YouTube tutorials on how to fix code I barely understood. My life felt like one long to-do list that never got shorter. And the loneliness, it didn't hit all at once. It crept in, slow and subtle, like fog filling up a room. I didn't even notice until one Saturday, I realized I hadn't spoken out loud in almost 30 hours. Not a single word. I tested my voice with a quiet, "Hello," just to make sure it still worked. Some days were better, others were heavy. On the worst ones, I'd sit on the floor of my kitchen, back against the cabinets, wondering if this was it. If this was what life looked like when you stopped trying to be visible. I missed connection, not just love or friendship, but the kind of connection where someone sees you and says, "I get it. You're not crazy. You're not invisible." I think that's why I took the contract job at Merrill Consulting when it showed up on a local tech board. The posting was vague. Temporary back-end troubleshooting, 3-month term, low pay. But something about it felt like movement, like forward. That's where I met Ethan Cole. He wasn't what I expected, not in the tech world, and certainly not in the executive world. Late 50s, kind eyes, wore cardigans to meetings, and asked more questions than he answered. On my first day, he stopped by my desk and said, "I'm glad you're here. You were recommended as someone who thinks differently. We need that." I thought it was a canned line, a nice HR trick. But then he proved me wrong. The project they brought me in for was a mess. Corrupted datasets, duplicated fields, cross-platform conflicts. The team was burned out and defensive. I spent 3 days just trying to understand where the mess even began. On day 4, I pulled an all-nighter, mapped out the system by hand, and submitted a 2-page diagnostic report. I didn't expect anyone to read it, but Ethan did. He called me into his office, handed me a cup of coffee, and said, "Walk me through your thought process. I want to understand how you got here." No one had ever asked me that. Not a teacher, not a manager, not even my parents. After I explained, he leaned back and smiled. "You see patterns others miss. That's rare." I sat there stunned. I didn't know what to say. Compliments, when you rarely receive them, feel like foreign currency. From that point on, he made space for me, brought me into conversations, gave me harder problems, trusted me with real responsibility. But more than that, he treated me like an equal. He didn't care that I'd switched majors 3 times or that my resume looked like a shuffled deck of cards. He cared that I showed up, asked questions, and solved things. And for the first time in a long time, I started to believe that maybe I wasn't broken. Maybe I wasn't behind. Maybe I was just early in my own kind of story. Outside of work, I didn't suddenly become happy. Life didn't magically bloom overnight, but the weight in my chest started to loosen, just a little. Ethan would drop by my desk sometimes, not with tasks, but with questions. "What's one thing you'd redesign in this system if no one was watching? Or if you could build anything from scratch, what would it be?" At first, I didn't know how to answer. No one had asked what I wanted before, not like that. But over time, I started to scribble things in my notebook. Not full ideas, just seeds. One of them was a prototype for a streamlined internal communication platform. Nothing revolutionary, but efficient, practical. Something I wished every place I'd worked had. I showed Ethan once hesitantly. He flipped through the sketches, nodded, and said, "You've got something here, build it, I'll back you." Just like that. No red tape, no ego, no "you're not senior enough." And so, after work and on weekends, I stayed up coding, watching tutorials, testing features. Not because someone told me to, but because it felt mine. For the first time, I wasn't building something to prove myself to anyone. I was building because I believed in it, because someone else believed in me first. That kind of belief, it changes you, quietly but permanently. Momentum is a funny thing. Once it starts, even the smallest shift can feel like a wave. After that first prototype, Ethan began inviting me to sit in on team meetings. Not as a note-taker, but as a contributor. He'd ask, "What's your take on this?" And wait, not just politely, but expectantly for my answer. I wasn't used to being asked for opinions, let alone having them taken seriously. It shook something loose in me. The more he trusted me, the more I leaned in. I started proposing ideas, troubleshooting more boldly, even pushing back when I thought a direction didn't make sense. And instead of shutting me down, he'd nod, consider, and sometimes even change course. It wasn't just Ethan either. Jessica, one of the senior strategists, began looping me in on product planning calls. She had a sharp edge to her, the kind that could slice through any nonsense in a room. But when she spoke to me, it was with a strange sort of respect. "You see around corners," she told me once after I flagged a data gap no one else noticed. "Keep doing that." I began to understand what it felt like to be valued, not for being loud or impressive, but for being precise, thoughtful, effective. And somewhere along the way, I realized I'd stopped needing to prove anything. The work itself became the reward. Long nights didn't feel like punishment, they felt like purpose. I started staying late not because I was behind, but because I wanted to keep building. I wasn't just solving problems, I was building a voice. Outside the office, the change followed me. I stood a little straighter, walked with more certainty. The barista at the corner cafe memorized my order and said, "You seem different lately, like you finally belong somewhere." And for once, I believed it. I remember one Thursday afternoon, Ethan pulled me aside and said, "I want you to consider coming on full-time." He paused, then added, "Not as a tech, as a strategist. I think you have a long game in you." It caught me off guard, not just the offer, but the way he said it. Like it was obvious to him, like it should be obvious to me, but it wasn't, not yet. My old voice, the one shaped by years of doubt, whispered, "Are you sure you can handle that?" I didn't say yes right away. Instead, I went home and sat with it, thought about the nights I'd spent crying on my kitchen floor, thought about how far I'd come from the girl who thought silence was safety, and then I thought about that prototype, the thing I built with my own hands from my own mind, the system that was now being rolled out across teams, saving them hours each week, the thing I created. That night, I said yes, not to the job, to myself. I joined full-time the following month. The shift wasn't just professional, it was internal. I began to make plans, savings goals, stretch projects. I created a mini roadmap of where I wanted to grow: UX systems, data logic, cross-functional integration. I wasn't floating anymore. I had traction. Ethan noticed, so did Jessica, so did others. But what mattered most was that I noticed. I still had moments of doubt, of course. Sometimes I'd read a glowing email from a client and still brace myself for someone to say, "Actually, this wasn't your win." Old wounds take time to close, but I was learning not to live from them. One night, after a successful project rollout, Ethan invited a few of us to dinner. It wasn't fancy, just a local place with mismatched chairs and strong coffee. We were laughing over something trivial when Ethan turned to me and said, "You know, I don't just admire how you think, I admire how you've rebuilt yourself." That moment landed somewhere deep in my chest. Not because I needed the validation, but because I finally understood the difference between recognition and manipulation. Recognition gives you space, manipulation demands you shrink. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small in the presence of success. I felt equal to it. In the months that followed, my world didn't just change, it expanded. Ethan started bringing me into higher-level strategy sessions, even when I wasn't technically required. "Sit in," he'd say, "just listen, and if something doesn't make sense, say so." At first, I barely spoke. I took notes, I observed, but then one day I spoke up. Just a quiet observation about an inefficient data process no one had mentioned. The room paused, a few eyes turned, then someone said, "That's a really good point." And just like that, I became part of the room. Not the girl tagging along, not the technician, the strategist. Outside of work, something even more important was happening. I was letting people in. Jessica and I started having coffee outside the office. We didn't just talk about work, we talked about life, about burnout, about boundaries. She told me about the time she almost left the industry and how one mentor changed everything. I told her about how I used to disappear into silence. She didn't try to fix me, she just listened. And in that quiet, I felt seen. I was building something bigger than a career. I was building a system of safety, the kind I never had growing up. One where being enough wasn't something I had to earn. The next morning, I walked to work with the sunrise, coffee in hand, head high. I wasn't chasing anyone anymore. I was walking in my own light. I didn't plan for things to move this fast. 6 months after joining full-time, the company was in trouble. Quantum Innovations had a brilliant product and a decent team, but they were hemorrhaging money. Their marketing was outdated, their user data misaligned, and their core platform lacked real-time integration. Internally, people were stressed, departments siloed, and leadership quietly panicked. Jessica was the first to pull me aside. "Ethan trusts you," she said. "And frankly, you see things clearer than most of us do right now. I think it's time you started speaking up." It was terrifying, but I did it. I studied user behavior, ran numbers, traced conversion failures. I worked evenings and weekends. I sat in empty conference rooms mapping out flows with dry erase markers until my hand cramped. Ethan checked in occasionally, offering support but never micromanaging. He simply said, "Don't be afraid to throw something bold on the table." So I did. I pitched a major pivot, reframed the entire product from a standalone software suite into a modular solution platform anchored by customer-centric diagnostics. It was risky, expensive. It also had the potential to change everything. They didn't say yes immediately. The board was skeptical. The COO raised eyebrows. But Jessica backed me. Ethan stayed quiet until the very end of the pitch, then looked around and said, "If we don't try something new, we're already done. I say we bet on the person who saw the iceberg before the rest of us noticed the water." They agreed to a limited rollout. 6 weeks later, our test market showed a 40% increase in engagement and a 27% lift in sales. By week 8, we were profitable again. They offered me the CSO position. I said yes. What I didn't expect came next. 2 days later, Ethan invited me into his office and closed the door. "I'm stepping down," he said quietly. My heart dropped. "What?" "I'm tired, Samantha, and I want the company to go to someone who built the future, not just the past." He paused. "I want you to take over." I blinked. "You mean interim?" "I mean CEO." I laughed, out of shock, then froze. "You're serious? You've been running this thing for months. You just didn't know it." I didn't say yes right away. I sat with it, walked around the block 3 times, called Jessica. She didn't even hesitate. "You're the only one I'd follow into a fire right now, and you know it." So I said yes. We didn't make a public announcement. Ethan wanted a slow transition. Let the work speak before the title does, he told me. And I agreed. For once, I didn't want attention, I wanted impact. For 2 months, I wore the role quietly. We overhauled onboarding, refined customer feedback loops, added a new data insights team. Internally, the energy shifted. People leaned in. They weren't afraid anymore. And then the invitation came. A cross-industry leadership gala, hosted by Pinnacle, the same firm where Rebecca, my sister, was now a VP. Quantum was invited as a comeback story. I would be expected to attend, expected to mingle, to smile, to stand on a stage I had earned in silence, and be seen by people who once forgot I existed. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel fear. I felt ready, but I didn't tell my family. Not about the event, not about the promotion, not about the title. Because deep down, I didn't want their praise. I wanted to protect what I had built from them. Call it pride, call it strategy, but I knew how my family worked. If they found out ahead of time, they'd find a way to diminish it, to make it about luck or timing or Ethan, anything but me. So I kept it quiet, let the moment unfold on its own. Jessica helped me pick the dress. Ethan had my back on logistics. The entire Quantum team had started referring to me casually as the boss, even though we hadn't updated the org chart. And me, I focused. Every hour I spent preparing for that event, I wasn't thinking about revenge. I wasn't planning some dramatic speech. I was simply getting ready to walk into a room full of people who didn't know I'd arrived, and watching their faces when they realized it. There's power in silence, and sometimes your best move is the one they never see coming. The night before the event, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, rehearsing how I might greet her. Rebecca, my sister, my benchmark for everything I was supposed to be. I tried on a smile. It looked calm, maybe too calm. I wasn't trying to look powerful, I just didn't want to look small anymore. I laid out my name tag, Samantha Lee, Chief Executive Officer, Quantum Innovations, and stared at it for a long time. I didn't feel imposter syndrome. I felt a quiet, earned certainty. This time, the name spoke for itself. In the morning, I walked into the venue early, before the crowds arrived. Checked the lighting, memorized the floor layout. Took a deep breath as I passed the Pinnacle banner. I knew Rebecca would be there. I knew she'd have no idea. And I planned to keep it that way, until the moment mattered. When our team arrived, I kept it casual, no fanfare. I mingled with my colleagues, let Jessica take point with press inquiries, observed quietly from the edge of the stage. I wasn't hiding, I was waiting, because I knew my moment would come. Not in the form of applause, not even in the form of recognition, but in her face when she saw who I had become. The ballroom at the leadership gala shimmered with polished ambition. Crystal chandeliers, black suits, clinking glasses, and conversations just loud enough to impress whoever was listening. I stood near the Quantum display, sipping water instead of champagne. My name tag was tucked neatly into the inside pocket of my blazer. For now, I saw her before she saw me, Rebecca Lee, my sister. She stood in the center of a small, admiring circle, laughing at something a board member from Pinnacle had said. Her dress was sleek, her hair perfect, and her presence effortless. She looked exactly the way I remembered, like someone who belonged, like someone the world had already decided was important. It hit me like a muscle memory, the familiar tightness in my chest, the automatic shrinking. But it didn't last. I took a slow breath, steadied my shoulders, and reminded myself, I wasn't here as the awkward kid sister anymore. I was here as a peer, as a leader, and yet she still looked right through me. We didn't speak until the second hour. I was mid-conversation with a small tech investor when she drifted over, uninvited. "Samantha," she said, her tone sharp with surprise. "I didn't realize Quantum brought support staff." I smiled politely. "Good to see you too, Rebecca." She tilted her head, scanning my outfit, the minimal jewelry, the simple black dress. I guess they're dressing consultants a little more formally these days. It wasn't a question, it was a jab, the kind she'd perfected over decades. Before I could reply, a man joined us, Michael Thompson, a high-level partner at a major fund. Rebecca turned to him smoothly. "Michael, this is my sister, Samantha. She helps out at Quantum. Something in IT, I think?" I watched his expression flicker, interest, then confusion, then dismissal. I'd seen that look my whole life, but I didn't flinch. I offered him my hand. "I'm Samantha Lee. Nice to meet you." Michael barely nodded before turning the conversation back to Rebecca. She basked in it, she always did. Later, I caught her pulling me aside, voice lowered but sharp as ever. "Please don't embarrass me tonight. This isn't your scene." And that was the final straw. I didn't plan to confront her, but she gave me no choice. It happened near the main display area, just before the press began gathering. Rebecca, standing next to two other executives, started recounting stories about resilient women in tech. She motioned toward me casually. "My sister over there, poor thing, switched majors 3 times, bounced between jobs, got lucky with this little Quantum gig. We try to support her when we can. You know how it is. Family." It wasn't just humiliating, it was scripted. Like she'd rehearsed this version of my life, and now performed it as entertainment. I felt the heat rise in my chest. For a split second, I considered walking away, shrinking again, but not this time. I stepped forward slowly, catching the eyes of everyone nearby. "That's quite a story, Rebecca," I said, calm, even. She turned, startled, then forced a laugh. "Oh, come on, don't be sensitive." "No," I said, loud enough now for the crowd to hush. "Let's keep going, tell them more, about how I was lost, how I bounced around. Let's talk about who I am now." She blinked. "Samantha." "Actually, Rebecca," a voice interrupted behind her. "Michael Thompson." He looked from me to her, his brow furrowed. "You said she worked in support?" Rebecca stammered. "Well, yes, she consults or manages a small—" Michael turned to me directly. "I just saw you in the keynote briefing packet. You're Samantha Lee, CEO of Quantum Innovations." The silence dropped like a curtain. Faces shifted, expressions tightened. Rebecca's froze completely. I held her gaze. "Yes," I said, clear and unshaken. 6 months now." She went pale. Why didn't you tell us?" I smiled, but not cruelly, just honestly. "Because I wanted to see how you'd treat me when you thought I was nobody." Rebecca opened her mouth, searching for something to say. A joke, a pivot, anything, but nothing came out. Michael cleared his throat, turning back to me. "That keynote proposal you submitted, it's impressive. We're looking forward to your talk." "Thank you," I said, without even glancing at my sister. Rebecca was still frozen. I could almost see the wheels turning, trying to rewrite the narrative she had just confidently delivered. But this wasn't hers to revise anymore. I looked around at the quiet crowd, now watching, most of them unsure what to say, so I gave them a way out. "If you'll excuse me," I said gently, "I need to join my team. We have a press meeting in 5. I turned, took 2 calm steps, and felt the shift, not just in the room, but in myself. The power dynamic I'd lived under for 3 decades was gone. Not because I yelled, not because I fought, but because I stood in the truth and let the weight of it speak. As I reached the edge of the quantum booth, Jessica met me with a look that said everything. "You okay?" she asked under her breath. "Better than okay," I said, letting out a quiet, full laugh. "I'm finally free." Behind me, I could still hear murmurs. I didn't need to turn around to know Rebecca was still standing there, still figuring out how to spin it. Let her. Because for the first time ever, the story wasn't hers to tell. It was mine. And I had just told the world who I really was. The moment ended, but the echo lingered. People filtered back into conversations, but their glances kept flicking toward me, toward her. Rebecca was still rooted in place, smile frozen, eyes darting like someone trying to rebuild a house from rubble. I didn't watch long. I had nothing to prove anymore. I walked straight into the press room, greeted the panel, and sat beside Jessica. She gave me a quiet nod, no words. She didn't need to say anything. She'd seen it all unfold. After the interviews, the crowd thinned. I stepped out onto the hotel balcony, letting the cool air settle over my skin. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, replaced by something quieter, exhaustion maybe, or release. That's when I heard her heels. "Rebecca." She stood a few feet away, still poised, but different now. The edge had dulled. Her voice was tight when she finally spoke. "I didn't know." I turned. "You didn't ask." She blinked, then gave a brittle laugh. "I mean, I knew you were working. I just didn't realize you'd gotten this far." "That's the thing," I said, soft but firm. "You never really tried to know anything about me unless it helped you feel superior." Her mouth opened, closed. She looked away, then back. "Look, I didn't mean to make you feel small." "You didn't have to mean it," I said. "You just had to keep doing it." We stood in the silence, the kind that comes after impact, the kind you don't fill. "I was just trying to keep the mood light," she mumbled. "No," I replied. "You were performing, and the worst part is you didn't think I'd notice, or that anyone else would." She looked down at her shoes. "I'm not here to punish you," I continued, "but I need you to understand something. That moment back there, that wasn't about revenge. It was about correction." Rebecca looked up. There was something fragile in her eyes now. "So what happens now? We just don't talk?" I shrugged gently. "We'll talk, maybe, but not if it means I have to keep shrinking to fit your version of me." She didn't respond, just stood there, eyes flickering like she was trying to find the right mask to put on. But for once, she had none left. I took a breath and stepped past her. "Good night, Rebecca." That was it. No dramatic speech, no final blow, just a line drawn in silence. Inside, the gala was winding down. People were sipping the last of their drinks, exchanging business cards, smiling over tired eyes. I moved through them with the calm of someone who had already said everything that needed saying. Back at the quantum booth, the team was packing up. Jessica handed me my coat and gave me a long look. "How do you feel?" "Lighter," I said, like I finally stopped holding my breath. We didn't linger. Outside, the night was cool, clean. I stood on the curb for a moment before the car pulled up, staring at the hotel behind me. For so many years, I had watched people, like my sister, command rooms like that. Rooms full of influence and applause. And I thought power meant becoming them, but it didn't. Power meant choosing what part of yourself you'd never compromise again. And tonight, I had chosen. The days after the event were quieter than I expected. There were whispers in industry forums, a few polite emails from people who had just realized who I was. But none of that mattered. What stayed with me was how normal it all felt. No parade, no spotlight, just peace. Rebecca texted me once, "You handled yourself well." I didn't reply. Instead, I spent the next few days focused on what I always did best: building systems, meeting with my team, eating lunch with Jessica in the break room, walking to work in the early morning light, coffee in hand, heart steady. I didn't need to relive what had happened, because I hadn't just won that night. I had reclaimed something I didn't even know I had given away: my voice, my boundaries, my truth. A week later, we had a small team celebration. No press, just pizza and playlists and stories shared around a long table. Ethan showed up halfway through and pulled me aside. "You okay?" he asked, studying me like a father might. Not with concern, but with care. "I'm good," I said. "Actually, I'm more than good." He smiled. "You've changed the culture here, you know. People are walking differently. I think that's because they've seen what it looks like when you don't let the past define you." He nodded slowly. "And when you don't let the people in the front row write your story." Exactly. Later that evening, as the team dispersed, I stayed back to wipe down the tables. Jessica came over, holding a paper cup of soda. "You know what I loved most about that night?" she said. I looked up. "What?" "You didn't fight her," she said. "You just stood there and let her fall into the hole she dug herself." I smiled. I wasn't there to fight her. I was there to stop fighting myself. We clinked cups in a quiet toast, and just like that, it was done. The storm, the old story, the weight, all of it left behind, exactly where it belonged, in the past. Peace didn't arrive like a thunderclap. It came softly, quietly, like a song I hadn't heard in years, but somehow remembered the words to. After the gala, there were no fireworks, no public declarations, no phone calls from my family. Just a strange, liberating silence. It didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Back at Quantum, life moved forward. The team kept building, refining, growing. And I moved with them, but no longer from a place of fear or urgency. I didn't feel like an imposter anymore. I felt present, grounded, capable. The media wrote a few polite pieces. One called me the quiet force behind Quantum's rise. I didn't repost it. I just saved the link in a folder named For Me. Because that's what this season of my life became, something just for me. I started waking up without the weight in my chest. I made tea instead of rushing to coffee. I walked to work more often, letting my thoughts wander without chasing productivity. For the first time, my days weren't driven by anxiety. They were led by intention. Some mornings I'd leave early, just to sit on a park bench and watch people. Not to think, just to be. And strangely, being with no justification felt like a bigger achievement than any title I'd ever earned. I brought little changes to the office, too. Plants, warm lighting, a bookshelf labeled Borrow Me. And on Wednesdays, we had a team breakfast where everyone shared something they were proud of, whether it was a work milestone or learning to make homemade bread. The ritual caught on. It became our reset button. Outside of work, I picked up new things. I joined a pottery class. My first mug was lopsided and barely usable, but it sat proudly on my desk anyway. I bought a sketchbook and filled it with messy, imperfect drawings that no one would ever see. And that was the point. I didn't do these things to prove I was healing. I did them because I was free to explore who I was without pain as the anchor. My apartment changed too. I added soft rugs, warm colors, a reading nook by the window. I lit candles not because I was sad, but because I liked the way lavender made the space feel calm. Evenings used to feel like a void I had to fill with distractions. Now they felt like something I'd earned, a place I could return to. Grief still visited sometimes, but it no longer kicked down the door. It knocked gently, passed through, and moved on. A photo, a birthday, an old voicemail, none of them spiraled me anymore. They just reminded me I had survived. And more than that, I had evolved. I didn't tell my parents about the gala, about the CEO title, about anything really. It wasn't about bitterness, it was about boundaries. I realized I no longer needed to report my worth. Their silence no longer defined my value. My sister's success no longer measured my growth. Instead, I started writing again, personal reflections, letters I didn't send, short stories without endings. I filled pages without editing, without needing to be clever or perfect. I just let the words find me. It felt like reclaiming something I didn't even know had been taken. One Saturday, I took the train out of the city and hiked a short trail I found online. At the top, I sat with a peanut butter sandwich and a journal. The sun filtered through the trees, and I realized I felt light. Not happy in the loud, performative sense, but quiet happy, whole happy. I pulled out my phone and opened a blank note. No filters, no hashtags, just a single sentence. I'm okay now. That was all. That was everything. Back in the city, my routines deepened. I set aside Sunday nights for quiet planning. Not the productivity kind, but gentle reflection. What made me feel good last week? What drained me? What did I learn about myself? Sometimes I wrote answers. Sometimes I just sat with the questions. I no longer needed certainty in everything. I no longer chased clarity as proof that I was on the right path. I was learning to live with the quiet parts, the unsolved parts, the parts of me still becoming. People around me started to notice too. "You seem softer," one coworker said, "but stronger too." I took it as the highest compliment. Jessica pulled me aside one afternoon and asked if I'd be open to mentoring a junior staff member. "They remind me of you when you first got here," she said. Quiet, sharp, a little unsure of where they fit. I said yes immediately, not out of obligation, but because I wanted to be the voice I never had. The person who sees you before the world decides you're worth looking at. One evening, walking home from work, I passed a family on the sidewalk. A mother, a father, and two daughters, one walking ahead, confident and loud, the other a few steps behind, quiet, staring at the cracks in the pavement. I wanted to stop and tell that second girl, "You're not invisible." But I didn't have to. Because someone, someday, would see her. Just like someone finally saw me. And more importantly, like I learned to see myself, not as the girl in the background, not as the afterthought, but as the main character, in her own damn story. It started with a dinner, not a big one, just takeout noodles on a rainy Tuesday night in Jessica's apartment. Her place had the kind of warmth that made you want to put your phone away. Books on every surface, mismatched mugs, a record player, humming something soft in the corner. I told her I was tired. She said, "Good. That means you're working from the inside out now." We ate on the couch, talked about everything and nothing. Her stories about the early days of her career made me laugh. Her first boss once spilled coffee on a client and blamed it on the intern. But then she said something that stayed with me. "You know what saved me? Having one person who didn't ask me to explain who I was before choosing to believe in me." That's what she and Ethan had become for me. Not just mentors, not just colleagues. They were anchors, the kind that kept me from drifting back to versions of myself I had long outgrown. I started to notice how different it felt to be around people who didn't need me to earn my worth every time I entered a room, people who laughed when I laughed, who stayed quiet when I cried, who never made me feel like I had to shrink so they could shine. This was what real safety felt like, what family should have always felt like. There were more nights like that, some with Ethan, some with newer friends I'd let in slowly. Movie nights, silent walks, shared playlists, no drama, no politics, just belonging. I hadn't known how starved I was for that kind of connection until it showed up and asked for nothing in return. One afternoon, Ethan invited me to a quiet cafe. He had just returned from a short sabbatical and wanted to catch up. We talked about quantum, about how the team was growing into its own skin. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "Do you think your family will ever see it?" I knew what he meant. I stirred my coffee slowly. Maybe, but that's not the point anymore. He nodded. Good. That was it. No lectures, no pressure, just space for the truth to be okay. I used to think healing meant reconciliation, that peace required closure, but now I knew better. Sometimes peace comes from acceptance, not of what happened, but of what won't. And I had accepted that my family may never fully understand me, may never apologize, may never even realize what they took from me. And that had to be enough. I didn't need to prove anything anymore, not even to myself. A few weeks later, I ran into my mother at the grocery store. It wasn't planned, it wasn't cinematic, just awkward and quiet and human. She hugged me, too tight and too long, told me I looked good, asked if I was still doing that computer thing. I smiled and said, "Yeah, still doing that." I didn't correct her. She asked if I'd join for dinner sometime. I said I'd think about it, and I meant it, because now I had choices, I had clarity, I had distance, and most importantly, I had built a life where her approval was no longer the gatekeeper to my joy. On the walk home, I didn't cry. I didn't analyze every word. I just listened to the rhythm of my own steps and knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. That weekend, Jessica and I went to the farmer's market. She bought fresh basil. I picked out honey and a tiny potted succulent I named Grace. We sat on a bench after, sharing warm pastries and talking about nothing urgent. "I've been thinking," I said, "about how people say blood is thicker than water." Jessica raised an eyebrow. "That phrase is misunderstood, you know. The full version is, the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. It means chosen bonds can be stronger than birth." I laughed, surprised. That makes so much more sense. And suddenly I felt it, that quiet recognition. For years I had tried to be enough for the people who raised me, the ones who gave me my name, my face, my history. But somewhere along the way I realized family isn't who names you, it's who sees you, stays with you, speaks truth, and still stays when it's uncomfortable. And those people, they were already around me. Ethan, Jessica, my team, friends who showed up with soup when I was sick and stayed silent when I needed space. This was my family now, not perfect, but real. That night, I lit a candle in my apartment, not for ritual, not for mood, just because it smelled like home. And I wrote in my journal one simple line: "I've let go, not out of anger, but out of grace." It didn't make the past disappear, but it made the future wide open. And for the first time ever, I was walking toward it, unafraid. A year ago, I thought healing meant closure. I thought it meant someone finally saying, "I'm sorry." I thought it looked like reconciliation, redemption, a neat bow on years of chaos. I thought it required going back, unlocking every door, proving I was worthy to the people who always looked through me. But healing didn't come from any of that. It came quietly, in the stillness of my own company. It came in the moments no one saw, when I chose peace over pride, distance over drama, truth over performance. Healing came when I stopped fighting to be understood, when I stopped shrinking in rooms that never made space for me, when I realized that being underestimated was never the real wound. Believing it was true was. Now I no longer carry that weight. I don't need applause to know I'm doing well. I don't need family dinners to feel rooted. I don't need permission to breathe in my own skin. If you're listening, if any part of this story sounds like yours, I want you to know something. You're not crazy for needing space. You're not ungrateful for wanting boundaries. You're not wrong for walking away. Because survival is not a life, silence is not peace, and love that demands you erase yourself is not love at all. You're allowed to start again. You're allowed to choose people who choose you back. You're allowed to stop explaining your softness, your fire, your ambition, your pain. You don't have to make them understand. You just have to make yourself free. And once you do, everything changes. The weight lifts, the voice returns, the mirror gets clearer. And what you see isn't the version they labeled not enough. It's the truth. That you've always been more than they were willing to see. And now you're not asking anymore. You're living it, not the forgotten one, not the cautionary tale, not the late bloomer or background character, but the author of your own story, told in your own voice, without apology, without shrinking, without fear. This is mine. And maybe, if you're ready, it can be yours too. Because here's the truth no one ever taught us growing up. You don't have to be the bigger person if it only means being smaller. You don't have to keep doors open just because someone else built the house. You don't have to bleed to keep the peace. Peace is yours to define now. And sometimes it looks like saying no. Sometimes it looks like saying nothing. And sometimes it looks like walking away and not turning back. You won't get applause for protecting your soul. You won't always be understood. But one day, you'll wake up and realize you didn't betray anyone. You just finally kept a promise to yourself. And that's where your real story begins. So here's to you, to the ones who outgrew their cages, to the ones who loved and left and still chose softness, to the ones who became everything they needed when no one else showed up. You are not broken, you are becoming, and the world has no idea what's coming next, but you do, because you're writing it, page by page, step by step, with courage in your hands. And no one gets to take that away from you ever again. If you've ever been compared, ever tried so hard just to be seen, and still felt like you weren't enough, then maybe Samantha's story is a little bit yours too. Drop a comment if this touched something real in you. Or simply write, "I'm learning to choose myself." You never know who might need to see your words today. And if this story resonated, please like, share, or subscribe. It helps more people find the courage to walk their own path, just like you did.